football company, and then we moved to Denver. He got transferred to Denver. And while we were there, I was 9 then, and I didn't do real great in school. And his
You can do it.
his way to deal with that was to take a razor strap, and he was going to beat the knowledge into me. This happened all the way up until I was about 13, 14 years old. And during this time, I grew to resent my father. But my mother and 2 sisters, we went to a church in Englewood, Colorado called First Christian Church. It was a non-denominational church. At the age of 11, I heard John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life.
Amen, Jesus.
That appealed to me very much. I wanted to know more. So I was saved that Sunday. A week later I was baptized. And I got involved with the youth. I did everything possible. And it was for the wrong reasons. I did the church camps and the choir practice and everything just to be away from my father. So I was a box checker. And that went on into my adult life. At the age of 13, or I take that back, 12, my parents divorced. At the age of 13, my father remarried. He was transferred to Houston. I chose to stay with my mom in Denver. Well, Mom couldn't handle me because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, and so she sent me to Dad in Houston. And I lived down there and that was in 1973. And in 1974, I had had enough of his needling me, and he did the whole, you're not going to amount to anything, you're not going to be anybody, you're not going anywhere, you're not going to make any money, you're just not going to be successful. And I believed him, so I didn't try to take my school serious. In 1974, I had moved into a house south of a town called Alvin, and back then gasoline was like 35, 36 cents, and he was complaining about us driving into Alvin to do our stuff with high school. And thank God my stepmom, she got him out of that and told him, says, these kids have these activities that they need to be they need to go to. So, but I had enough of him berating me, and I decided to move back to Denver with my mom. So I finished my sophomore year in Denver, and again, Mom couldn't handle me, so she, I guess, talked to my dad and my grandparents. She drove me to Oklahoma City where my grandparents lived, and I thought, okay, well, I'll finish high school and live with my grandparents, because when I was growing up, that was another place I escaped to in the summers, was to go visit them. And I got a reprieve, and I got encouragement from my grandparents. And so we had a great relationship. I was the only grandson with the family name, so my grandfather took a very he was very partial to me because of that. And I'm thinking, well, I'll finish high school in Oklahoma City. Well, that was not what they had in mind. So they sent me to Job Corps out in Arkansas, and I was out there until November of 75, and our dorm had won a contest, so they were gonna go back down in that area and go to the girls' job corps over in Guthrie, Oklahoma. Well, my grandparents lived in Edmond, which is where they were going to get the hotel room. And I said, can I go stay with my grandparents? They said, that's fine. So I called and talked to my grandmother that morning before we left, and she sounded great. Get there, I called the house. My uncle answered the phone, and I told him, I said, can I speak with Grandma? And he said, Stuart, I'm sorry, but your grandma didn't make it.
Oh.
She had a massive heart attack before I got there. She was sitting in her chair, and they always, in every house that they built, had what they call a picture window in the living room area. And that's where she was sitting waiting on me to get there. And I didn't believe it, because no, my grandma, she was gonna live forever, So I get to her house and she's not there, and it really didn't hit me until I saw her in the coffin. And then I lost it. It was real to me. Well, I talked to the people from Job Corps, and they said I could stay and, come back later. So I stayed through Thanksgiving and went to her funeral and everything, and then we went back out there in December of 75. In January of 1976, they had a group going to Fort Smith, Arkansas, to talk to the recruiters. So I said, okay, I'll go, and I talked to the Navy recruiter, and I passed the test, and I got accepted to go to the Navy. This is began a pattern of not finishing things I started. I went and had my basic in San Diego. When it came time for the schools, I didn't want to be what they wanted me to be, so I failed out. They then assigned me to an aircraft carrier, and I was there in August of 76 to December of 76. And in December, I had a girlfriend. We were all over her house, me and a couple of the other guys. And when everybody else left, me and one friend decided to stay there and not go back to the ship. Well, we were gone 5 days before we finally decided to go back to the ship. Well, of course, we had captain's mast. I asked for a discharge. The captain granted it, and so I didn't finish Navy either. I didn't finish my 4 years, and I left in January. So then in 78, I married my first wife. My mom got sick that summer, and with cancer. She had a large tumor in her chest. And I finally got up there to see her in November of 79 or 78, and she didn't look good at all. They told her she had 6 months to a year to live. So all three of us kids were there, and I was basically the only one that had enough pull with my sisters that I pretty much took over what was going to happen. And my wife at the time was pregnant with my son. And I went down in and talked with my mom, and the last thing she said before I left the room, she says, I want you to take care of that wife and your son. I said, Mama, we don't know what the baby is. She says, don't argue with me. So God told her that I was going to have a son. And I always believed everything my mom said. So in March of 79, she passed away January 1st, 1979. 3 months later, my son was born. And I lost my direction. I started drinking heavily. Did that all the way up until 1985. May of 1985, we went and parked our trucks, all met at this one bar every Friday night, and the person that made the most money, their truck that made the most money, bought the first round. Everybody else left with me and another friend, two other friends, and we left there and went to another bar. Drank there, drank quite a lot there. We were drinking beer and whiskey. Left there and went to another bar, and wow, I drank a lot more there. My friend lived about a block away from there, and I took him home. He tried to talk me into just sleeping in my car. And I told him, I said, the last time I did that, your stepmom told me I needed to go home, be with my family. So I said, that's what I'm gonna do. I got a block away from my house. I never saw the other car. Turned in front of them. They hit me and pushed me into a parking lot of a convenience store about from here to that post away from the gas pump. They did the breathalyzer, and I blew a .19. And they were amazed that I was still alive. But later on, I had talked to a doctor, and what he told me, he says, when you're that drunk, your body's relaxed. He said, if you would have tensed up, he said, you probably would have died. The two boys that were in the other car did die. And they charged me with involuntary manslaughter. I was sentenced to 3 years, Texas Department of Corrections. When I got out of there, I went and did my parole, and I did everything they wanted me to do. Went to AA. Didn't matter. When I got off, as soon as I got off parole, I started drinking again. I was mad at God because he took them, but he didn't take me, and I didn't understand why. So for 39 years, I beat myself up over that. I just could not forgive myself. The family even came to me in court and told me that they knew I didn't do it on purpose, and they knew that it wasn't, I didn't want to do it, it wasn't intentional. And they invited me to come to their house when everything was over and done with. I never did go see that family, and I regret that now, because they had a right to know who I am and what was going on with me at the time it happened. So then I married my second wife in '92, and blew through that marriage just as quick as I blew through my first one. I threw myself into work, and I wasn't home. I wasn't the spiritual leader that I needed to be. My kids were raised basically by their mom and their grandmother, and the only way I knew that a man should be is from my father, and he worked all the time, so that's what I was supposed to do too. But that wasn't true either. Then when in 2017, my son and his wife and their kids invited me to move up here, so I did. And like Hank said, I was at I went to Celebrate Recovery. February of last year, I quit drinking. I only had to drink for 17 months. But I shared my story, and afterwards, I do remember, because Hank came to me and he said, "What do you think about going to men's encounter?" I said, "Well, sure, I'll go." He says, "I think it'll really help you." And so there wasn't any openings. He couldn't get me in. There was another friend of mine, real close friend of mine, Brian Lane. He called me and says, "Do you want to go to men's encounter?" And I said, "Sure." So we went last year in August, and I still hadn't forgiven myself at this point. I heard a testimony, and I thought to myself, wow, this guy forgave himself for what he did. That I should be able to do the same thing. And Brian could see that I was struggling as to whether or not to go forward. And he leaned over and he said, you really should go. So that was just enough of a nudge. I went forward, and as soon as I stepped out into the aisle, I locked eyes with this man, and he prayed for me. I gave all that away. It's no longer part of my life. And it was almost immediate. I had this joy that I didn't never know was possible. And I'll tell you, it's very possible. It's possible for anybody. It's a gift that God has given us. It's not something we deserve, but He's given it to us anyway. Now I go as a server, and next month will be a year exactly since the first time I went, and I'm going back as a server for the fourth time this year. All those years I kept saying, why did God leave me alive? And people kept telling me, well, he has a purpose for you. And I thought, man, what is it? Well, at that men's encounter, I found out what it was. He wanted me to be a server. He wants me to be a fisherman for him. He also told me that he wanted me to work with the youth. So I am a youth leader at my church. I've been teaching a Bible study for the boys this summer. And on the 29th, I'm going out with them to Grand Oaks. And
Amen.
Spend time out there with them. I have given them my testimony. I gave it to the middle school and high school boys. That was tough, because kids can be so judgmental, and I was afraid that what they would think about somebody that killed two people. But I got nothing but love back from those kids, and that's what I get all the time from them, is love. But I knew I had to tell them what my testimony, because, and this is what I told them. I said, the reason why I'm doing this is because I want you to know that you don't have to make the same mistakes I did. And I also told them, I said, I told you this because I wanted you to know who I am and why I do what I do. They all knew about men's encounter because they'd heard me talk about it, but they didn't understand why I did it. Now they know. And I get so much love from these kids. And this last year's been, wow, just crazy. I mean, it's been so much fun. I didn't think I'd ever have so much fun in my life. I have since made amends with my father. And my second wife. My first wife passed away in 2011, so I never got to tell her I was sorry for what I did, the way I acted. I apologize to my kids. My daughter is my biggest supporter. She tells me all the time, Dad, just keep doing what you're doing. She says, I know you changed. She says, I could hear it in your voice as soon as you started talking. And I said, well, thank you. My daughter-in-law is jealous of my son and me, our relationship, and she has driven a wedge between us. And I hadn't talked to him in about 2 years. We made amends, and then she threw something else at me, and I couldn't pass it up. I had to say something, and by doing it, it caused another wedge. So I just keep praying that my son will see that his dad's not an evil person, and he restored my son to me once. I believe he can do it again. And thank y'all for listening.